Hello friends, once again, thank you for checking into this video. And in this video presentation today, I'm going to talk about sampling methods, or also known as the sampling techniques. Okay, so wrong road will take you to wrong places, isn't it? So similarly in research, wrong sampling method will give you a wrong conclusion about the populations. Okay, so in this presentation, we are going to talk about the different types of sampling methods. And there are two types, which are probability sampling methods and non-probability sampling methods. Okay. So to begin with, let's start with the first one. What is a probability sampling method or a sampling technique? Okay. So probability sampling means that each and every unit of the population has an equal chance of being selected in the sample. Okay. And probability sampling methods are of 5 different types. Okay, and we will be discussing into each one of them one by one. Okay, so to begin with, let's start with what is a simple random sampling. Okay, so to understand a simple random sampling, let's use an example. Okay, so let's say there are 50 students in a class. Okay, and from these 50 students, we have to select one student who will be a class representative. And now, the teacher in charge of that class, what will she do? He will or she will randomly select any one of the 50 students in the class as a class representative. And during the process, each of the 50 students has equal chance of being selected as a class representative. Therefore, the probability of each and every student of being selected as class representative is equal. So when such kind of technique is adopted for a sampling, then such kind of method of sampling is called a simple random sampling. Okay, all right. So these are the write-up. You can pause the video if you want to read on this. Next, we'll talk about what are stratified sampling. Okay, so first thing first, we have to know what is stratification. Stratification is actually the process of dividing the group or the population into different subgroup or subpopulation. And these subgroup are called the strata. Okay, they are called strata. All right. And then population or the samples will be collected randomly from each of these strata. Okay. Now, the simplest example of stratification is, let's say you are interested in buying a pair of formal shoes. So you visit any online website. Okay. So when you look for shoes, you'll find that the shoes has been stratified into different strata. Okay. So now, similarly, okay, so now what happened now in stratified sampling, the important characteristic of each group is that they will be either homogeneous or heterogeneous. If they are homogeneous, then the sample that will be yield from the population will be homogeneous itself only. But what if it is a heterogeneous? You have to divide the stratified the samples into different homogeneous subgroup. Okay, and then in which samples will then be randomly selected from each of these stratum. Okay, and then sampling will be done randomly. Okay, and to understand this, let's take an example again. Let's say there are 120 students in class, and we need two students, two male and female candidates, who will be selected to represent the college in an inter-college quiz competition. So as a class, it will be a heterogeneous, isn't it? Because both male and female will be. So we have to stratify the population, and we'll stratify the population into a homogeneous group. What that is, male and female. And then from these subgroup or the homogeneous group, two candidates or two students will be randomly selected. Okay, will be randomly selected, and then they will be the representative of the class in the quiz competition. Okay, all right. So now, okay, this is a write-up. You can pause the video if you want to. Now, however, stratified sampling is further subdivided into two types. Okay, One is called the proportionate stratified sampling, and the other is called the disproportionate stratified sampling. Okay. And now to understand these two different types of stratified sampling, I'm going to use an example again. Let's assume, okay, that let's assume that there are 250 students who have been enrolled in the year 2017 in the Department of Environment and Traditional Ecosystem. Okay, let's just assume that. And then after by now they are already graduated. Okay, so we are interested to carry out a study of how effective is the course in changing the perceptions or the view and the understanding of the students towards the environment and its importance. Okay, so what we have to do, right? So now let's say, now these 250 students, first thing first, is a population. Now we have to stratify into different sub-population or different strata. So we are going to divide it into, let's say, postgraduate and undergraduate students. Okay. And now let's say out of these 250 students, 100 students are actually in postgraduate and 250 students are in the undergraduate course. Okay. And now what happened now? Let's say this. Let's convert this. The number of students into percentage. All right. So now, how many students? What's the percentage of postgraduate students and also that of the undergraduate students? So after calculation, if you calculate 100 by 250 into 100, it will come to 40%, and similarly, it will be 60% of the undergraduates. Okay. So now let's say in that study, we are required to collect sample of 30 samples. Okay, 30 students we need. Okay. So now 40% of 30 will be how many students should we, how many samples should we collect from postgraduate and how many should we collect from the undergraduate. Okay. So we'll get the results of, we'll get the results of 12 students should be collected from the, will represent the postgraduate, and 18 will represent the undergraduates. Okay, so what you'll find here that the size of the samples, okay, you'll find that the size of the sample which is randomly collected from each strata here is proportional to the size of the population. Okay, so this is what is a proportionate stratified sampling. Now, if you talk about disproportionate sampling, okay, in this disproportionate stratified sampling, the number of samples collected from each strata is equal. Okay, irrespective of how this strata is distributed in the population. So in this case, we say 30. So what we do, we are not concerned about the number of students. We just take, okay, let's take 15 and 15 from each strata. Okay. So this is what is known as a disproportionate stratified sampling. Okay. Now let's move on to the next type of probability sampling, and that is a systematic sampling. So for carrying out any systematic sampling, first, the population from which the sample is to be drawn are first numbered serially or maybe arranged in an orderly fashion, such as 1, 2, 3, or maybe A, B, C. Okay, so in order. Okay. Then secondly, the first sample from the population is selected randomly, and then from there onwards, samples from the population will be selected after a fixed interval. Okay, and to understand this, let's take this example. Let's say there are 26 students in a class, and the teacher or the faculty of the class wanted to collect the feedback from each student with respect to the topic already completed. Okay, so what happened? I said that the population have to be arranged. Okay, they have to be arranged. So we have arranged them from A to Z. Now, the next step in systematic sampling is to randomly select the first sample from the population. Random select. So let's say in this case, we select C as the first sample from in the population. And let's say we want to carry out the sampling after every fourth interval or the fourth student. Okay. So since we carried our first sample is C, so every fourth student after C will be G, followed after G, a fourth student after G is K, and similarly to that of O, S, and W. And so these C, G, K, O, S, W are systematically a sample from the population of 26 students. Okay, and then the teacher will get the information or the feedback from them. Okay, so when you carry out such kind of study, So this is known as a systematic sampling. All right. So now let's move on to the next type of probability sampling, and that is called a cluster sampling. And in cluster sampling, the population is grouped into different clusters. Then from these different clusters, few clusters will be selected randomly. Okay. Then from each selected clusters, sample will be selected using simple random sampling. Okay. So now to understand this, let's assume that, okay, let's say that there are in Martin Luther Christian University, let's say there are the total number of students are is 1,000 who are pursuing the studies in this university is 1,000. Okay, so on all these 1,000 students, let's just assume it's hypothetical. Okay, is all these 1,000 students are actually from different corner of the Northeast India. Okay, so we want to carry out a study in relation to the the accommodation problem faced by the students, you know, with respect to house rent, or maybe with respect to the distance from the university, or the expensiveness of the house rent and all that. Okay, so what we do is that, as I said, this is called a cluster. So what we have to cluster the population first. So what we do, since they are all from the different states in Northeast India, we we group them into different clusters. Let's say they have the states of different states in Northeast India: Meghalaya, Assam, Nagaland, Mizoram, Sikkim, Tripura, and Manipur. Okay. Now this is a cluster. Now from this cluster, we will randomly select, let's say, any 3 out of the 7. Okay, any 3 out of the 7 states in which, let's say, we select Meghalaya, Nagaland, and Tripura. Okay, randomly. So from here, from these 3 now, okay, from these three cluster, samples will then be collected. We will then collect samples with respect to the objective of our study. Okay, so when you carry out when you carry out such kind of work, when you divide the population into different clusters, and then you select few clusters, and out of samples then randomly selected from these selected clusters, you are carrying out what is known as the cluster sampling. Okay, now let's move on to the next type of a probability sampling, and that is a multi-stage sampling. As the name suggested, collection of sampling in this method of sampling involve multiple stages. Okay, let's say that is the large population or group is divided into different smaller group or subpopulation. Okay, however, the number of subgroup or subpopulation totally depends on the requirement of the study. Okay, you need to remember that. So let's say again, we'll use an example. Let's say the government of India want to carry out, let's say, 10,000 household with respect to socio-economic status of female-headed household in rural area. So what happened now? The state of Meghalaya is divided into 11 districts. Now, not all the districts will be studied. So what happened now? Let's say 5 districts are randomly selected for the study. Okay. Okay. Now, out of 11, 5 have been selected. Now again, in each district there will be different blocks, isn't it? There will be different blocks here, and then again, not all the blocks will be studied. And then let's say randomly we select 2 blocks from each district. Okay, 2 blocks from each district for the study. And now within each block again, okay, within each block again there will be number of villages again. And then not all the village will be possible to study, so we will randomly select only 3 of the village from a particular block. Okay, so now again within the village there will be 100 numbers of household. Okay, so now then from these household again we'll randomly selected the required number of samples. Okay, the required number of samples will be collected from the selected village within these selected blocks and within the selected district. And then if you see, there are different stages here which is involved. There are multiple number of stages involved before you reach towards your sample, to reach towards to the collection of your sample. Okay, so when you carry out such kind of work which have different stages are involved, it is known as a multi-stage samples. Okay, all right. So with this, we have come to an end to the what is a probability sampling and what are the different types of probability samplings. Okay, now let's move on to the next type of sampling method or sampling technique, and that is called the non-probability sampling methods. Okay, and when you say non-probability, is the opposite of probability. Here, each and every unit of the population does not have an equal chance of being selected into the does not have an equal chance of being selected into the samples. Okay, so non-probability samples are further subdivided into judgment sampling, convenience sampling, quota sampling, and snowball sampling. Okay, so let's see into each of these one by one. What is a judgment sampling? In this method, the samples from the populations are selected based exclusively on the choice or the judgment of the researcher. Therefore, it is also known as a purposive or a deliberate or an authoritative sampling. Okay, to understand this, let's take another example here. Let's say imagine a school week is happening. Okay, so in this school, the school has been divided into 4 different houses. Okay, blue house, red house, green house, yellow house, just like in school days. Okay, and then each of these houses they have a teacher in charge. Isn't it? Let's say a team is required a team of 11 students is required to be selected from each house to form a team in order to play let's say football. All right. So now the teacher in charge here will let's say out of the total number of students in each house, okay, let's say blue house, will randomly select 11 students which he according to him, okay, according to his judgment that looks fit to play football. Okay, now when sampling is collection based on the choice, exclusively on the choice or the judgment of the researcher or the teacher in charge here, then you are conducting what is known as the judgment sampling. All right. So let's move on to another type of a non-probability sampling. Also a non-probability sampling, and that is the convenience sampling. As the name itself suggests, sample is drawn from the population based on the convenience of the researcher or the readily availability and easy accessibility of the sample to the researchers. Okay, the simplest example of convenience sampling is we have all come across this. Let's say any person of any particular organization will stand on the street and he will start distributing his promotional pamphlet to the general public walking in the street, isn't it? That is one of the common way of the simplest example of a convenience sampling. Or we can take another example, which is let's say a very famous food critics visited Shillong city. Okay, and then he wanted to write an article or a review about the food in this restaurant in Shillong city. So what happened now? These food critics, what happened now? So what happened? These food critics will visit the restaurant which is most convenient to him. Let's say maybe near to his hotel or to the place which is like which has been the most convenient to him. So based on this, he'll eat the food, and then after some time, and then after eat the food, and then go back, and then based on his experience, he'll write an article about the type of the food in the restaurants found in Shillong city. So what did he do exactly? So he's using a convenient method of sampling, right? So now, next type of a non-probability sampling is called the quota sampling. Okay. Now here also the population to be sampled is first divided exclusively into different subgroup or strata. Okay, called quota. Okay. However, the sample present in one strata will not be found in another. Remember that. Okay. And the most important feature of quota is that they have a specific characteristics. Okay. And in addition, the size of these quota is proportional to the size of the stratum in the population. Okay. And then from these different quota, then a sample is drawn from each in which will represent the population. Okay. So here, let's take an example. Let's say regarding the employee in Martin Luther Christian University. However, let's say this employee, the employee in Martin Luther Christian University let's say is divided into based on the different tribes. Okay, let's say they are from general category, ST category, SC category, or OBC category. Let's say these are the different groups we are. So we are divided into different quota, and general category will have its different characteristic, isn't it? And similarly, ST will have different, it's distinct. They are all distinct from one another. And let's say from each here, the population of from each strata, from each strata here will sample 50 samples from each. Okay, and our from each, and even from each, and then again from here we'll get a total number of 50 representative from each group will be selected, and as a result 200 samples will be collected. And inclusive here, out of these, from each 50, from each group, 25 male and 25 female should be collected from each. Okay, so basically out of these 200, 100 will be male and then 100 will be female. So you've seen here that we have divided the population into different quota, and the sample from which you collect is proportional to that of the population here. Okay, so this is what is known as a quota sampling. Now let's move to the last type of a non-probability sampling, and that is called the snowball sampling. Snowball. Okay, as I said, snowball. If you walk, or if you just imagine that you're standing somewhere in a snow area, and then you just take those the snow, and then form a ball and just let it roll down, and you see that as it roll down, the slope, you'll find the slope, the snowball is getting bigger and bigger, isn't it? So similarly in this, what does it mean here? The same thing. So here in this method, the sample of the required information about any particular subject of interest is collected first from just a few individuals. Okay, then the first respondents will further help the researcher in identifying other people or other individual, okay, other individual who have a knowledge about the subject of your interest. And in this way, and these another second group here will also identify another people who know about this particular subject, will give you information of that. So you see that in this process, it will be continuous, and it will be continued till the sample size is obtained. This sample size from the population is optimum. Okay, so therefore a network is being formed as you collect the sample from the population. And to make this simpler, let's take an example. Let's say we want to identify the number of traditional healers in any village. Okay, so as a researcher, what you'll do is that you will go to the village headman or the elders, for example, and then let's say you ask him, sir, can you tell me about how many? Is there anybody that you know who have who practice these traditional medicinal herbal practices? And he said, yes, there is Mr. B. And then you go to Mr. B, and then you collect your information. And in addition to that, you ask about Mr. B, can you tell me, is anybody else who practice the same, the same profession like you do? He said, yes, I know. He said, yeah, you go to the other corner of the village, you'll find Mr. B, and you go to that side of the village, you'll find Mr. B. Now you see, you're collecting information from Mr. B about your subject of interest here. And when you go to Mr. V, again, Mr. V will say, yes, he'll give you another additional information. And again, Mr. P will give you additional information. And as you go, you see that a network is being formed. Okay, so when you collect information in such kind of method of sampling, then this is what is known as the snowball sampling. All right. So with these are the reference that I use in this study, or in this video presentation. And with this, I'd like to say thank you so much. And I hope this video will help you, and it will guide you and make you understand what are the different type of sampling methods or sampling technique used. Okay, so with this, thank you so much once again, and God bless.